So, our final breakout session today addresses a conflict with significant global implications. Ukraine as the front line of the fight for freedom. Moderating this discussion is Dr. Tom G. Palmer, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute and the Executive Vice President for International Programs at the Atlas Network. Dr. Palmer has decades of experience promoting liberty worldwide, including significant work supporting activists and disseminating classical liberal ideas in Eastern Europe after the fall of communism. Joining him are three Ukrainian leaders. Anastasiia Holovnenko is a Ukrainian human rights advocate and strategic communication expert. She currently leads advocacy campaigns at the Center for Civil Liberties, the human rights NGO awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Her background includes work with independent media like the Kyiv Independent and Hromadske, as well as anti-corruption initiatives in Ukraine. Anna Tymoshenko is the CEO of Ukrainian Students for Freedom, representing the activism of Ukraine's youth who are contributing to the country's future amidst the ongoing war. Nataliya Melnyk is the executive director of the Bendukidze Free Market Center, an independent think tank in Kyiv established in 2015. Her work focuses on advancing liberty and free markets in Ukraine through policy analysis, education, and collaboration. She has co-created economic literacy courses, edited Ukrainian editions of the Economic Freedom of the World report, and serves as an investment consultant. She holds degrees in political science and European studies. This panel offers insight from Ukrainian women engaged in human rights, student activism, and free market advocacy during a critical time for their country. Please welcome Tom G. Palmer, Anastasiia Holovnenko, Anna Tymoshenko, and Nataliya Melnyk.
The cause of liberty isn't limited to one country or one people. It's a universal cause. And this is very important to all of us. It's why I think, in a certain sense, today we're all Ukrainians in this respect. Maybe not language and other issues, but in this respect, anyone who believes in freedom is a Ukrainian. I'd like to start this discussion so we get some actual interaction with our representatives here. What did you come here to learn? And what would you like to learn about? So if you just had a couple of thoughts, raise hands if you'd like to suggest this is a topic I would like to have discussed. Who would like to? Right here.
I would like to discuss a vision to counter some authoritarian practices by Ukrainian government in times of war, because we need to maintain our liberties even when we fight in greater evil such as Russia. Because in Ukraine we have, okay.
That's a very good one to raise. Anything else you would like to raise? Okay, let's start then with that. In the context, we've seen a totalitarian state attack a relatively free state. Not perfectly, but certainly in comparison, there's no question which is the free country, which is the enslaved country. And the free country has been attacked. And in times of war, we know liberty is often one of the casualties. That's a quite common and normal response. What have Ukrainians been doing to maintain their freedom in the context of the least favorable situation for freedom, which is when you're under attack? So any thoughts about this? How to maintain this sense of liberty is what you're fighting for as you're attacked by a totalitarian state? Just tap the top. I think it's working.
Yeah. So I know what you're talking about because we just talked about this. But if you look at our panel, you see 3 panelists from Ukraine, and we have something in common. We're all women, right? I'm alluding to the fact that Ukrainian men, the vast majority, are not allowed to leave the country, right? So we have a situation in which we don't have freedom of movement because the border is closed if you're a man 18 years plus, even though the mobilization age is 25. And obviously, it is creating issues. I know that you're referring to the issues with getting passports for Ukrainian citizens who are outside of the country. And by Ukrainian citizens, we understand you're referring to Ukrainian men. And it obviously all ties to the fact that Ukrainian men are the first ones who would be doing the defending. They are the majority in the Ukrainian armed forces, even though we have, I think, 80,000 women in combat positions in the Ukrainian armed forces, and a lot more than that connected with the Ukrainian armed forces. So this is obviously a very concerning situation in which we have citizens that are put in different groups, right? But let's look at the root of the problem and where it's all coming from. And we would not be dealing with these issues if it weren't for the easy fact of Russia invading Ukraine. Does not mean that we shouldn't be concerned with actually authoritarian tendencies that the government is displaying. But I would say I'm actually less concerned with them because the cure to these authoritarian tendencies would be the elections. And as soon as we're able to have the elections safely, right? Holding the elections for the sake of the elections is not what I'm talking about. But as soon as we are able to hold the elections safely, Ukrainians will be able to cast their vote, speak out, show their attitudes towards what has been happening in the country internally, right? But not right now, because when our entire existence is under threat, we do have to admit that some of the things we have to compromise on. Not let go of, because I can't, objectively say on that topic, because my personal freedom was not restricted in the way that many other Ukrainians' personal freedom was. But I see it, I'm not blind to it, but I do see the solution to it. And unfortunately, it's not dependent on me personally, but it's dependent on the negotiations that are happening right now and on the armed forces of Ukraine.
Respond.
I would be grateful to Nataliya and also add something here. I had a talk yesterday with my friend Thomas, he might be in this room, and he told me that recently he took a look at democracy index, and there are 4 categories of countries over there. The red one, dark red one, is fully authoritarian dictatorships. The orange or yellow ones are the most likely to be authoritarian dictatorships very soon. Second, the light green or light blue one is hybrid democracies, fluid democracies, called any name. And the light, like very bright blue or green one is amazing democracies that we're in right now, for example, Czech Republic. And he said that Ukraine has been in hybrid democracy for a very long time, since the reforms, starting with Revolution of Dignity, and still is. Which is interesting that Great Britain, where he's from, is barely above the border of fluid democracy and full democracy. So yes, it is in a different category, but it is not much of a difference. And I am also not blind, and I see the violation of individual liberty. But I can tell you that there is so much more freedom in Ukraine than there is in Russia. There is so much more individual, economic, and political freedom in Ukraine that I'm very happy about. I was born and raised in Sumy. This is 30 kilometers from Russian border, and I'm very happy my parents didn't make a move to the northeast of my hometown before I was born. I have to tell you that our organization and liberty movement in Ukraine is flourishing. We're becoming bigger and greater, and we're pushing a lot of reforms even within the wartime. And I had a talk at the Liberty Fair with one gentleman, and I told him that unfortunately tough situations like war, big war, require tough solutions. And once there is a question of life or death, it's very hard to make this decision. And Liberty Movement is trying to push for more freedom constantly. And this is very important, because once the war is gone, once there is election, there is new parliament, new administration, or not new administration is going to be elected by the will of people of Ukraine, there should be the move towards democracy and freedom all over the place. And it should not get lost because of the habit of having been making decisions through the wartime.
You can add a little context. If you're in Poland and you're about to be invaded by Soviet Union and Third Reich, one could imagine that some coercion by the Polish government would be preferable to what happened when the Soviet Union and the Third Reich invaded and killed millions of Poles. So it's not a game, it's a difficult trade-off sometimes. One thing as a foreigner who's been visiting Ukraine for decades, I have seen changes that maybe are more incremental for people living there, but more striking to outsiders. Much more open society, a society much more willing to accept and embrace diversity, not like Russia. Russia has a kind of diversity, which is a lot of enslaved nations, like the Buryats and Chechens and others. And Ukraine has a citizenship where there are Jews and Muslims and Christians, there are Orthodox and Greek Catholic, all Protestants, all kinds of different groups together, but together as Ukrainian citizens. The focus is on to be citizens, not subservient to a master identity, which we've seen in Russia. How do you see the future of Ukraine as a pluralistic society, a society that embraces a multitude of different religions, identities, and so on? Anastasiia, where do you see that going?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. I will answer the same as I would answer for the previous question. When we are talking about human rights, when we are talking about freedom, we also always think about people and countries and everywhere, because human rights have no borders. And for us, it's crucially to obtain this chance for democratic transition and for freedom for everyone, even if we, for some reasons, don't like them or we can't reach them. And answering your question first, I think it's super important that you brought it here, but I also want to bring something you told me personally, that there were 500 trials issued by Ukrainians who couldn't get their passports abroad, and they were abroad and in Ukraine, and some cases abroad were declined due to domestical issues reason. But there were, correct me if I'm wrong, 30 cases won in Ukraine. Yeah, in Ukrainian court against Ukrainian ministry by Ukrainian people. So yeah, we have some problems as any system, but I think that we can rely on three things walking this narrow corridor to democracy. And these three things could, not things, but parts should cooperate very smoothly. It's democratically elected leaders, it's powerful civil society, and it's people. Because freedom and democracy, it's not only the right which is granted in Europe, it's also a responsibility at this moment for everyone.
I'd like to raise a question then about the international dimension. So the way that we hear this from the Trump administration, this is somehow, there were Russians there and they're going to be liberated by Russia, all kinds of nonsense. But one thing we have seen, and I have met people from Belarus, in Ukraine, fighting for Ukraine, including in the armed forces, people from Georgia, Chechens fighting because of what has happened to them under this Kadyrov Putin dictatorship is unbelievably brutal. Central Asians and others who see Ukraine as a front line, a military front line at the moment. But we have other front lines. Georgia, which is very much on the knife edge right now. Taiwan, which has been seriously threatened, and the Taiwanese people are very sympathetic, as you could imagine, to Ukraine, and there are some friendly discussions happening behind the scenes in a very discreet way between Taiwanese and Ukrainians. How international do you see this conflict? In other words, not only a local territorial dispute, as some have characterized it, but its international dimension as well.
I would like to start. In 2023, I was at Atlas Network Liberty Forum, which was happening in November, and that was approximately a month after October 7th, when Israel was attacked. And a lot of people were asking me whether I'm not afraid that everyone is going to forget about Ukraine because there is something new going on in the news, at the TV, in media, and in the talks of people. And my response to this was very clear. It still stays the same almost 2 years in. This is the chain of evil. China supports Russia. Russia supports Iran. They all support Venezuela. They support Cuba. And there is this whole chain of evil countries which are fighting against freedom, which are attacking freedom. And I think that it is very important to understand that this is not purely Ukraine-Russia war. This is not properly a front line that is only divided between Ukraine and Russia, because we talked with you, Tom, about the Telegraph advertisement that, have you ever heard about Riga, Tallinn, and Vilnius? If Kyiv falls, you will hear about them. And this is something that we all have to remember. And I thought like this in 2022, I'm still thinking like this right now. Kyiv is not going to be taken. Russians are creating the maps of Europe, of New Europe, but they're leaving Kyiv to Ukraine. But there is so much more territories which are Ukrainian, and which is much more important, there are so much more people living there who do not want to live under Russia.
So if you look at the data and the big picture, you will see over the past, I think, decade or even longer, the rise of authoritarianism around the world, right? So this is a tendency, that the pattern that we need to acknowledge. We can track it around the world. We can look at the reasons for it. One of the main reasons would be also Russia's activities around the world. And then if we go back to Ukraine, the war in Ukraine didn't even start in Ukraine. It started in Georgia. back in 2008, because this was basically like a testing ground for Putin to see what would happen. You know, what if I invade a neighboring country? Nothing happened, and then it just progressed. Then came Crimea, and very recently during one of the conferences, and it was a free market, pro-liberty conference, and one of the attendees, an American, we were having a conversation, and one of the questions he asked was about the war in Ukraine, and that when he was in Russia 10 years ago, the situation was better. And I was like, well, you know, war had already started then. He was like, no, like, Russia invaded Ukraine. He's like, no, Russia invaded Crimea. And I was like, well, Crimea is part of Ukraine. So by invading Crimea, Russia invaded Ukraine. So we are still in this weird loop of not everyone understanding what's happening. And, you know, having this vision of, oh, it's a Ukraine issue. You know, we're going back to so-called regional interests, and that Russia is, for some reason, this regional leader that is allowed to have interests that lead to directly either invading or intervening in elections and having their puppet governments and so on and so forth. And this is a situation, a very dangerous situation, because it is stripping us of our agency. It is stripping Ukrainians, Georgians, Moldovans, whoever you want to look at, of their identity, of their voice, of their will, and the right to choose their path forward. When we had our revolution of dignity in 2013 and 14, I was hoping that we were being, you know, loud and clear in our messaging of where we would like to go forward, because it was the voice of Ukrainians. And it seems that now we see a situation in which, for some reason, the voice of the Russian government or the voice of Putin, whatever you want to put it, is more important than the voice of Ukrainians or the voice of Georgians, Belarusians, however far gone they are, or Moldovans, and so on and so forth. So if the world, the collective West in this case, gives in right now, what kind of message do you think it gives to the authoritarian leaders around the world who are already gaining power, who are already being more outspoken, and we do see the coalition a lot more visible. We see North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, it's not only the danger to Ukraine, it's not only danger to Europe because it's not a European problem. It's the danger to our future, to our children, and the rest of the world.
Let me add just one word to thank you so much for everything you said. You told that it's like a chain of evil. Let me add the word justice here, because it's also a chain of impunity. Because Russia committed war crimes in Chechnya, Georgia, Moldova, Syria, Libya, other countries, and they have never been punished for that. So, as you said, this appeasement of dictators only encourages them to go further. So if we want to prevent such wars in future, we just need to try to punish those people who started them in the first place. So justice is the word I wanted to say.
Let me raise a question that's outside of the normal sphere of this discussion, and something I never thought I would be doing, but when the war started, I was in COVID quarantine in Turkey, and the day I got out with my test, I flew to Warsaw, and some of my Polish friends, Tomek is here, arranged. I bought a big van and loaded it up with goods and spent 6 weeks crazy back and forth with supplies and refugees And someone asked me once, said, how long have you been doing this? I said, I don't know, like maybe 10 days or 2 weeks. And I looked on the calendar, 6 weeks, because it's a different mentality when you sleep in the truck every night and driving, and you just don't feel time. But it's very important to me, and I have given a lot of my savings to buy sniper rifles and drones. I never thought I would deliver sniper rifles to women snipers, by the way, in Ukraine, very good shots. So I'm personally invested in this. It's very important to me, and I will continue when I earn money. I send it to Ukrainian defense, not only intellectual, but military as well. What message do you think Europeans should be hearing about the threats they face and the need to be supportive of Ukraine, not merely morally, politically, but militarily as well?
Well, I think the main message for Europeans in general would be, if it's not resolved in Ukraine, it will come into their homes. And then it's a whole lot different matter, because I would like you to ask you a question. By raising your hand, show me who amongst you is ready to pick up weapons and defend your home, your family, or your country. Look around and you will see the number. It's not all, right? It's not even the majority. And the same would be if we ask Europeans. Not everyone is ready to fight in a war. That's why, I get a bit jumpy when I am called a freedom fighter, right? Or representatives of NGOs get called freedom fighters, because now I know what, real freedom fighting looks like. And it's not pretty. It's very bloody and messy, and it's very scary. The freedom fighting is happening right now in eastern Ukraine. And for all of them have different reasons. I think the majority would be, if you ask Ukrainian servicemen and women why they're doing it, they would say, in order for our children not to have to do it. Right? So it's not about defending a piece of land. It's not about even defending borders or Ukrainian identity. It's very simple. It's a lot simpler than that. It's for the sake of their already born or unborn children. And not everyone is ready to do that. And then that's how we circle back to your first question, right? Because everyone who was ready to do that in Ukraine is already dead or is already doing it. Some have been doing it for more than past 10 years, right? And they're getting exhausted, and we're running out of people, because unfortunately one of the biggest Russian resources is people, and we cannot compete with that. And if you take this question to Europeans and see how many of them, from the comfort of their homes, from the comfort of their democracies and more or less comfortable lives, would be willing to exchange that for the dirt and blood and the murder that war brings, I think it would give them a bit of a different perspective.
Our organization is around 800 members. And we have several ones who are serving in the army right now. They have all gone there voluntarily in different units. Some of them are paramedics, some of them are combat, some of them are drivers for the army. Some of them are girls, some of them are boys. Different age, different backgrounds. They were all doing very different stuff before they came to war. And now they're there, because they see the purpose in it, and they see that this is the way they can accomplish freedom. They're real freedom fighters. Thank you. About Europeans. Working on one project recently, I have discovered that the message of that Europe is going to be next works partially, but what also works is the showing of how valuable Ukraine is. And not only as a front line, Ukraine has been known as innovation hub of Europe very long before full-scale invasion. Ukraine has been exporting a lot of goods for Europe, US, Asia. Ukraine has been the transfer circle for the roads between Europe, Asia, different countries, north and south. Mr. Leszek Balcerowicz, who is sitting in this room, has said yesterday in the talk that right now Ukrainians who are working in Poland are saving Poland from declining of economy. And showing the value of Ukraine in so many aspects should be very crucial for Europeans. We are your neighbors, or like not even neighbors, we are part of Europe. Geographical center of Europe is located in Ukraine. We are part of Europe, we have always been. And unfortunately, unlike our fellow Baltic countries, we did not recover that fast from the Soviet Union, but we're on the way. And the administration of the US that has recently come to power has shown us that the centralization of power, also in military regard, can be very easily turned off. And then we will all have to deal on our own. And Ukraine is extremely grateful to the US and to European countries, to our partners and allies who have been supporting us, also to Asian countries who have been supporting Ukraine. And thank you for this. And if you are helping us, you will never have to see it by your eyes. And I'm wishing that none of you will ever live through what Ukraine is living right now.
Raised the issue of innovation. I'd like to turn that to a more economic dimension, because something that's remarkable is even though there was not as much progress as there should have been made on economic reform. So in 2014, I organized with Bendukidze, the Minister of Economy from Georgia, and a great hero. I'm sorry you did not get to meet him. The Emergency Economic Summit for Ukraine, and Kaka was very clear. He said, you had all these years since end of Soviet Union, and you fucked up. He used that language. It was a little shocking in the audience. You didn't do these things, and if you don't, there won't be a Ukraine. He died later that year, possibly of natural causes. And this issue of getting the reforms right is still ongoing. A lot of problems in Ukrainian economic policy. But the growth of the economy outside of the unreformed areas has been pretty astonishing. Logistics, things like Nova Poshta, this is an amazing company, private company. When I was visiting a drone manufacturer that I gave money to, and I bought a lot of drones, I said, how do you get these to the front lines? And they said, Nova Poshta delivers them to the trench. It's like United Parcel Service or Federal Express, just driving right up to the battlefield to deliver the drones. I was really surprised. And so many other innovative companies. So where do you see innovation happening in Ukraine? Do you think this is going to be a big strength for Ukraine in future?
One of my favorite things that Kaha ever said about Ukraine and Ukrainian economy was, he said, the patient is more dead than alive, back in 2014. And in some sense, he was absolutely right, because Ukrainian economy had been surviving mostly on foreign currency brought in by Ukrainians who worked outside of Ukraine. So it was a big support to the economy. And then Ukraine is a case in which you see if given freedom to grow and develop, this is exactly what happens, and this is what happened to our IT sector, which is absolutely amazing. And it's not just because of the skilled workers that work in IT. It was because of the special taxation regime that they took advantage of. And it encouraged more people to join in. And it was a top profession to select because that's where you made money. And that's where people kept making money even after the full-scale invasion started. Right now, we do see more of a negative effect on the IT sector because companies that would outsource projects to Ukraine, they tend to look elsewhere now. But the first 2 years of the invasion, despite the blackouts, despite all of the issues, IT sector was developing further. One of the effects of the invasion was that at one point in 2022, about 75% of small businesses had to shut down. But that was the immediate effect of the full-scale invasion. After that, resilience showed its face, and if you come to Ukraine, you see cafes and restaurants open. You see businesses that are working. Well, because people need to make money somehow, but because of the fact that people are working in extreme conditions, because of the production disruptions that are happening, people have to get creative. And people tend to get creative in the toughest situations. Nova Poshta is a wonderful example, and this is what happens if business is allowed to do its job, right? Because it's a private company. We would have a lot of memes for recently deoccupied areas that would show just a bunch of people running in, and above their heads you would see logos of different businesses because they would be the first ones to rush in. You would have Nova Poshta, you would have ATB, which is a grocery store, right? And so on and so forth. But this is how business, it's not like they're not afraid of risking their lives, right? Not risking their assets, not risking their investment, but they're there because people need them, because their consumers are there. And they have to come up with, these ways to deliver drones or deliver humanitarian aid, which you would think is not the main job of a private post company, but this is something that they're doing that reflects the need in the society right there. And the digital aspect of it all is a different source of innovation, and Ukraine is becoming a great example for the rest of the world of how digitalization can improve all areas of life, on top of the military innovation, which is obvious, right? Because Ukraine is a big testing ground right now.
Let me raise a question then, if I could circle to civil society in Ukraine has a different character to civil society in many other countries. It's much more robust. It's a less atomized society in important ways. And one of the things that was so striking, if you go back to 2014, there was almost no Ukrainian army at that time when Ukraine was initially invaded. Not only Crimea, but Donetsk and Luhansk, where Russian soldiers were clearly invading. They only admitted this much later. Well, of course, they were Russian soldiers. And the people who stopped them were baristas, taxi drivers, owners of cafes, automobile repair shop workers. Ballet dancers, all kinds of people who came out and defended their own country. It was really quite astonishing. And with the support of the grandmothers who made the meals and the families who helped to put together their uniforms and so on, later the state developed and began to do these things that normally are a state monopoly. But in Ukraine, they're not. Most people don't know Ukrainian military units are often privately financed through fundraisers. This is not the case in Czech Republic, is my guess. But the units are actually supported by communities who raise the money to buy weapons and uniforms and bandages and everything. Do you see this as something that will continue, that Ukraine will continue to develop a strong civil society to be able to be supportive of the society, but also a check on the state and the authoritarian tendencies states often have as well? Anastasiia.
Yeah, as you mentioned, around 25% of Ukrainian army is now made up of civilians, writers, philosophers, I don't know, singers, ballet dancers, lawyers. And civilian people also joined these humanitarian initiatives to help, for instance, with finding missing people or illegally detained people. For instance, the vast majority of cases is worked by the relatives who also form the NGOs. Just because every 6th Ukrainian has someone missing or illegally detained, so the problem is so huge you just can't, it's impossible to ignore it. And what I also wanted to mention as an innovation, but also about civil society, is that during the war, we not only fight for our freedom from Russia, but we also fight for our freedom for our own government. We have mass demonstrations during the war because it's like the sign of democracy, and my colleagues from the Center for Civil Liberties are going to this demonstration to monitor all the patches the police should wear to stay like in the legal field. So I think that this phenomena of fighting on both fields against inner enemy, not enemy, but potential consequence of decreasing of freedom in the country, plus and simultaneously against the enemy.
You had a thought on that?
Yeah, as a person who works with students, as the most active, probably most emotional and passionate age group of people, I can tell you that people are not getting bored. Students are not getting bored, and they're not losing the energy to build the civil society. Most of our right now generation of students were early or like middle teenagers while Revolution of Dignity was happening. And this is exactly the time period where your mindset is shaping in this way. And I'm very grateful that Revolution of Dignity has happened to Ukraine, not only from political point of view, but also from the civil responsibility point of view. And when the full-scale invasion happened, we heard so many stories of individuals stopping Russians in so many different ways. From grandma who was throwing cans of tomatoes into drones, to people who were putting sand into the gas tanks of tanks, for them not to move. And so many different stories, and I hope there's going to be a book about it in the end of the war.
A movie.
Or a movie. I hope someone was documenting it. True. We can do the interviews at least. We see the power of individual in this war very, very clearly, and it's amazing. And what is very important right now, what we're doing in our think tank jobs, is to give people the theoretical, philosophical explanation of why it is happening. Why do you have this notion of doing that? And how can you develop it to make your life freer and better?
I was thinking about, trying to explain what it's like to live and work in Ukraine right now when I'm traveling abroad and speaking to foreigners. But Alexandra Matviichuk did it best. She, the head of Anastasiia's organization, she wrote a post after the recent Kyiv attack, which was the deadliest over the past couple of years. And she said that right now we are working not only for the living, but for the ones who were killed. And it's a very strong motivation, and it's a very strong kick in the butt that makes you do more. And people who joined the armed forces obviously are doing a lot. And when we hopefully soon have peace established, This desire to continue making the most out of the situation because the price was so high, it will not go away. And once again, right after the Revolution of Dignity, the young people had two choices. Those who wanted to make a difference, and a lot of them wanted to make a difference, either go into the government or join the non-governmental sector. That split was very obvious. And in most cases, they're still there in those different lanes, but still there trying to do their best. The same thing will happen after the end of war, because people, the level of sacrifice that we have experienced in Ukraine and the level of destruction, they just don't allow you to not think about it. And then for your own sanity, you try to come up with some positive side to it all. And the positive side would be to, put in your heart and soul and sweat and blood into the rebuilding efforts. The literal ones and the indirect ones. The indirect being the economy. Building a stronger Ukraine that will not have to rely on the allies, to go begging to the allies just to be able to protect the cities from missile and drone attacks. We would like to have our own Iron Dome, right? We would like to be able to continue innovating and creating while also being sure that our kids are safe, that they can go to schools, that they don't have to study in bomb shelters, so on and so forth. So it's a very powerful motivator, and I absolutely think that the role of the civil society will just keep growing after this.
To see if we have some thoughts from the audience, but I'll share a quick observation. I recently reread some of the plays of Aeschylus, and in the Persians, he talks about the Persian invasions. This had a huge impact on the awareness of freedom in Greece. The whole concept of freedom emerges partly out of the Persian invasions. What were we fighting for? Why did we sacrifice everything not to be conquered? And in that play, the Persian queen asks, who are these people? Who is their commander? Who is their owner of the flock of sheep, the phrase. And the chorus says, they are slaves to none. And this seems to characterize what Ukrainians are saying. We are slaves to no one. And this invasion is refocusing the history of Ukraine. Is the history of freedom and the struggle for freedom. The Zaporizhian host, the self-governing communities of Ukraine as opposed to the Muscovite tyranny. Muscovy was always a tyranny since its founding. And the Ukrainians had self-government. They had not democracy as we understand it today, but consultative government and elections and electing a hetman and so on. It was not a slave-based society. So that there is this rebirth of the idea of liberty in Ukraine as something that is ours, something to be grasped because of this nightmare of the invasion. I'd like to see if anyone would like to pose a question or raise an issue right here, sir. Take a mic.
Hi. So first of all, thank you all very much for your insights. It's been very interesting. I have a question which I know for some is a little bit of an uncomfortable question, but it touches a little bit on something that was touched on at the start. Why doesn't Ukraine extend the mobilization also to women? And I ask this for two reasons. One, in an age when access, for example, to the workforce is increasingly comparable, it stands to reason, I think, that the responsibilities before the state would also be shared. But number two, there are only a number of entities which mobilize women also, and in the case of, for example, the Kurds and Israel, arguably in the 20th century, it allowed them to offset huge numerical imbalances in various conflicts. Thank you.
I'm going to start, I can continue.
So in Ukraine, women's participation in the armed forces is voluntary, but at the same time, we do see a situation in which not all units are ready to send women into, let's say, high-risk situations, right? So they're trying to keep them safe. Mostly because in women, they see their daughters, wives, sisters, and so on and so forth. But at the time of war, the role of women becomes very important. More important than I think during the time of peace, because in many cases, women are the only childcare that can continue with men serving, right? So the women are staying back to take care of the kids. Women take on new jobs and new professions because of the shrinking of the workforce. And so there's still a very important role as citizens that falls on women. And they are the ones who help have the economy going, right? Because in order to be able to support the armed forces, we need to somehow finance it. And if we need to finance it, we need to somehow get the money to do it. It comes from taxes and so on and so forth. So someone needs to work, someone needs to take care of the children, and someone needs to make sure that medical needs are met. And so the teaching is going on, and the majority of people in medicine and in teaching are women. So you can't just, that's how it works. You can't just, that's why you can't mobilize everyone, right? You cannot possibly mobilize 100% of your population, even if you're fighting the war against a much stronger opponent.
I'm in the 6th year of medical school, hopefully graduating in 2 months. I am having already my documents in the drafting offices, like everyone who is graduating medical school. And there are a lot of professions where women are not encouraged to get drafted right away, but who are ready to serve in the army in the special needs. About what Nataliya said, in Ukrainian there is a very nice saying: if you do not work under the bullets, you soon are not going to have anything to shoot with. So yeah, women are playing a crucial role in the economy right now, and the economy has to get going. Also not to rely only on our allies, but to raise our independence in the fight for freedom.
Answering your question, it turned out that answer to your question is like the second side of the coin of patriarch society in Ukraine. Because it turned out that Ukrainian army is just not ready to take women, because in 2022 we didn't have even pants for women in army. We had no ammunition designed for women. So yeah, it's a process, and this question is still under discussion on different levels. But I feel like if we will need to fight a few years more, it will be solved.
I do think that everyone needs to get ready, like to go through the courses, the preparation, be able to shoot, do the first aid kind of thing, but it takes years. You can just, send the people there and expect them to contribute in a meaningful way without the preparation.
Hi, thank you. So during the panel, you discussed that this isn't a regional conflict, but a global one, and this chain of evil, as you called it. My question isn't so much about that, but do you have any concerns about the other side? We could call it almost a chain of good, that link might be fracturing, especially if we have the leader of the free world threatening to annex its neighbors and claim territories that are not, is losing its moral superiority. So are you looking for new allies? What's the way forward there?
Wonder who you're talking about.
Well, there are multiple people, I would say. I do not lose optimism. Maybe this is a very Ukrainian facet to have, because if we didn't have optimism, I don't know how we would survive. Probably we would all have died from depression and not from Russia. I have optimism, and I think that even when there are tough times, they're going to change. Fortunately, I guess who you're talking about, soon, in a year and a half, there's going to be midterm elections, and it's going to show how the mood of people is going to be changing. Same in Europe. We're having a lot of elections this year, and it's going to show where and in which direction it's going to go. What I might be concerned about, yes, about, Nataliya also mentioned that, the race of dictatorship and authoritarianism through years. This tendency can stay, but our role here, and the role of you, our dear audience, people who love freedom, is to keep fighting for it on the level where you can, to keep spread the word of freedom, fight disinformation, and support the ones who are really fighting for it.
I have an unusual position to give a thought on this. My great-grandfather went from Prussia to the United States and bought a horse at 16 to fight against slavery in the war between the states. He returned to Poland at that time after World War I. He was an old man, and he went back to Poland, was stripped of his citizenship because he had fought in a foreign army, not quite the intent of the law, but that's the way it worked. And now I've come back to Europe because I think this is, frankly, the stronghold of liberty today. I'm very worried about the United States. My friends there are fighting very hard against this tyranny that is being established, and it is going to be a tyranny unless it is stopped in the near future. But I think Europe needs to be the region of the world that will save the rest of the world. But first it must save itself and recommit to values of liberty and also defense against an aggressive totalitarian state with aggressive intentions. And I think this is now undeniable. We have time now, just a few minutes, just very quick last thoughts, 1 minute each. What would you like people to leave here being aware of?
Answering your question, that the real leaders of democratic world is just people like you and me. And we need to remember that, because when the war started, there were real people from different countries who heard us, who helped us with food, with essential goods, with different stuff, and that made all the difference, while our governments could send just, deep concern and gelmets. So the real leaders of freedom, of democratic society in the world are you. So don't forget about it.
To continue with that point of view, sometimes, especially young people, they feel powerless in certain situations and even tend not to go to the elections because they feel that their vote doesn't matter. So your vote matters on a daily basis, right? Your life choices, you are carriers of this freedom, and if you're willing to protect your freedom in the opposition of getting complacent and just going with the flow and hoping for the next elections, right? It's something very different. Freedom fighting that is less bloody is happening every day, and it's on your shoulders, and it's going to be on the shoulders of your children, because it's very difficult to obtain freedom, but very easy to lose it, especially if you are, are wearing pink glasses and trying to ignore the warning signs. And there are very many warning signs around the world right now.
My dear friend said, and colleague, he said that we are underestimating what we can do within 1 year. No, we're overestimating, what we can do within 1 year, but we're underestimating what we can do within 5 years. And looking back 5 years ago, I would not imagine, even like 3 years ago especially, for Ukraine to be at the place where we are right now. I was very scared. A lot of people were very scared, but we kept going. And this is what I would love to encourage you to do, please keep going. Make a little step every single day. Make a little step in your thought with your friends, in political field, in the NGO, in your education, anywhere you can, to keep going every single day, because then you're going to have a great result, you're going to create incredible solution to the problem, you're going to get rid of the processes which were not working, which were not creative, anything, where you were stuck with your productivity and efficiency, and create something new which is going to solve the problem. Please support Ukraine, because we're fighting for freedom, and please keep fighting on your own. Thank you.
On this note, I want to end with one quick thought. We've all heard the phrase Slava Ukraini, which in English should better be translated as long live Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine doesn't sound right in English, but long live Ukraine. But the response that is given is the one that's appropriate here, because we are three heroes of liberty. Heroyam Slava. Please join me. Heroyam Slava.
I would just like to ask you, don't forget that at 6 p.m. Starts final keynote in the main room, so be sure to not miss it at 6.